Somewhere in the world at this very moment, an 8-year-old girl is playing with dolls, drawing in her school notebook, or perhaps running through the yard with an innocent smile on her face. She laughs loudly, asks curious questions about everything she sees, and dreams of becoming a teacher, doctor, or ballerina when she grows up. This is the reality every child should have, a protected childhood, full of discoveries and infinite possibilities. But on September 14, 2013, in the remote province of Hajjah, Yemen, a girl of the same age had her childhood brutally destroyed by an ancestral tradition that became her death sentence. Rawan was only 8 years old when she was given in marriage to an adult man 5 times her age. What should have been just another night of play and childhood dreams became her last night of life, exposing to the world a dark and cruel reality that millions of girls still face today in silence. Before continuing with this story that completely changed my perspective on child protection and made me deeply question how many Rawans exist around the world at this moment, I need to make an important pause. This is not just a distant story from a country you may never visit. This is a reality happening now while you watch this video in different corners of the planet. Write in the comments where you're watching from, your city, your country. I want to know how far this awareness message is reaching, how many borders we're crossing together, and how many people we can impact so that no more Rawans have to die from a tradition that should have stayed in the past. Your participation in the comments shows me that this cause is spreading and that together we can make a difference. To truly understand the magnitude of Rawan's tragedy, we need to dive deeply into the complex and devastating context in which she lived. Yemen, strategically located on the Arabian Peninsula between Saudi Arabia and the Gulf of Aden, is much more than just one of the poorest countries in the Middle East. It's a nation fragmented by decades of conflicts, chronic political instability, and a humanitarian crisis that intensifies each year. In 2013, when little Rawan lost her life, Yemen already showed clear signs of the approaching collapse. The economy was in free fall, with more than 54% of the population living below the poverty line. Unemployment reached alarming levels, especially among youth, creating an environment of desperation where families made extreme decisions to survive. Hajjah province, where Rawan was born and died, perfectly exemplifies the country's challenges. Located in the northwest region, it's a predominantly rural and mountainous area, characterized by isolated communities where access to basic services like education, healthcare, and even clean water is extremely limited. The roads are precarious, often impassable during certain times of the year, creating isolation that perpetuates traditional practices without question. In these remote communities, tribal structures exert much greater influence than the central government. Local leaders and tribal elders are the true authorities, making decisions that affect entire lives based on codes of honor, ancestral traditions, and immediate economic needs. The modern concept of individual rights, especially children's and women's rights, simply doesn't exist in this context. Education, particularly for girls, is seen as an unnecessary luxury in a region where every family member must contribute to basic survival. Girls often assume heavy domestic responsibilities from a very young age, caring for younger siblings, fetching water, helping with food preparation, assisting in subsistence agriculture. This reality shapes a perspective where the transition to marriage seems natural and inevitable. The healthcare system in the region is practically non-existent. Hospitals are hours or even days away, qualified medical professionals are rare, and knowledge about reproductive health and risks associated with early marriage is minimal. Many women in the community probably never had access to basic information about child development or the medical dangers an 8-year-old child would face in a conjugal situation. Reconstructing Rawan's life before her death is a painful exercise that forces us to confront the reality of millions of girls whose stories we'll never know. At 8 years old, Rawan was at the age when children develop their first true friendships, begin to form their identity, and discover their unique talents. Under normal conditions, a girl of this age should be attending school, learning to read and write with enthusiasm, asking endless questions about how the world works. She should have time to play, to be a child, to make small mistakes without serious consequences, to dream of a future that seemed infinitely possible. But Rawan's reality was drastically different. Growing up in a family facing extreme poverty in Hajjah province, her responsibilities probably began very early. Girls in her situation often assume heavy domestic tasks, caring for younger siblings, fetching water from distant wells, helping with food preparation, assisting with basic agricultural tasks. Her education, if it existed, was probably interrupted or never properly started. In rural Yemen, especially in 2013, the female literacy rate was alarmingly low. Many families simply saw no value in educating girls who, in their perspective, would inevitably marry and become the responsibility of other families. Rawan's family, like countless others in the region, probably lived in a situation of chronic food insecurity. Regular meals were uncertain, access to basic medical care was non-existent, and the future seemed like a constant struggle for survival. In this desperate context, decisions that seem unthinkable to external observers begin to make a cruel and distorted logic. It's likely that Rawan didn't even fully understand what marriage meant. For an 8-year-old child, adult concepts like conjugal intimacy, marital responsibilities, and motherhood are abstract and incomprehensible. She may have been informed about the marriage in vague terms. Perhaps they told her she would go to a new house, have a new family, be cared for by her new husband. Her parents, especially her father, who probably made the final decision, may have genuinely believed they were ensuring a better future for their daughter. In communities where single women face severe social stigma and where economic opportunities for women are non-existent, marriage may seem like the only form of security available for a girl. Rawan's marriage was not the result of a fairy tale romance or a personal choice based on affinity and love. It was a cold, calculated commercial transaction between desperate families, where a child literally became an economic commodity. This reality exposes the cruelest face of extreme poverty, where even parental love can be distorted by the need for survival. The matrimonial arrangement process in communities like Rawan's follows protocols established for generations. Intermediaries, often older women from the community, facilitate negotiations between families. They evaluate qualities of the potential bride, her apparent health, her work capacity, her purity, as if they were evaluating cattle for purchase. Rawan's groom, a man approximately 5 times older than her, represented relative economic stability in the community. His adult age meant he was already economically established, owned property or means of subsistence, and had the ability to pay a significant dowry for the bride. For Rawan's family, this agreement represented immediate financial relief and one less mouth to feed. The financial negotiations probably included detailed discussions about the dowry value, property arrangements, expectations about future children, and expanded family responsibilities. Every aspect of Rawan's future life was negotiated and decided without her participation or consent. Her opinion, her fears, her preferences, none of this was considered relevant to the process. The concept of child consent simply doesn't exist in this cultural context. Children are seen as family property, specifically of the patriarch, who has complete authority to make decisions about their lives. The idea that a child could have valid preferences about her own future is considered absurd and disrespectful to ancestral traditions. Cultural justifications for child marriage are numerous and deeply rooted. Protection of the girl against possible sexual violence or dishonor is frequently cited, a perverse logic that seeks to protect through institutionalizing abuse. Guarantee of purity until marriage is another justification based on cultural obsession with female virginity as a measure of value. But what no one in the community expected was that a few hours after the ceremony, this protective decision would become a death sentence for an innocent girl. Rawan's wedding day must have followed the traditional rituals that had been repeated for generations in her community. Traditional Yemeni music echoed through the air, women ululated in celebration, men danced with ceremonial rifles, and the aroma of spices and roasted meat filled the environment. For everyone present, except for the small protagonist, it was an occasion of joy and community celebration. But while adults lost themselves in the festivities, alarming signs were being systematically ignored. Rawan was visibly, unquestionably, a small child. Her 8-year-old body showed no signs of pubertal development. Her hips were narrow like a child's, her torso was small and fragile, her stature was clearly infantile. Any honest observer could see she was years away from the physical maturity necessary for marriage. During the pre-wedding rituals, which often include preparation of the bride by older women, signs of Rawan's extreme anxiety were probably evident. 8-year-old children cannot effectively hide the fear or confusion they feel. Their facial expressions, body language, perhaps even tears or protests, must have clearly communicated her discomfort. The women responsible for preparing Rawan for marriage, dressing her in bridal clothes, applying traditional henna, vaguely explaining what awaited her, probably witnessed her terror firsthand. But in a culture where questioning male decisions is unacceptable and where traditions are followed without question, these signs were rationalized as normal bride nervousness or appropriate shyness. Basic medical knowledge about child development was practically non-existent in the community. Many of the women present probably married young too, perhaps not as extremely young as Rawan, but still without real understanding of the medical risks involved. Generalized medical ignorance created a situation where obvious dangers were invisible to those who should have protected the child. During the ceremony itself, Rawan probably exhibited behaviors that anyone trained in child development would recognize as signs of imminent trauma. Children under extreme stress often become very quiet and submissive, or alternatively may become agitated and tearful. Both reactions are natural defense mechanisms when a child faces situations that are completely beyond their understanding or capacity to control. The groom, a full adult man, was presumably aware of traditional conjugal expectations. In cultures where marriage is seen as property transfer from the bride's family to the groom, expectations about immediate consummation are often non-negotiable. The idea that he should wait until his wife physically matured was probably never considered. And then came the night that would transform a celebration into tragedy. What happened on Rawan's wedding night represents one of the most brutal and incontestable demonstrations of why child marriage is not merely a cultural or traditional issue, but a medical and human rights problem of extreme gravity. When the marriage was consummated, Rawan's small, fragile, and completely immature body simply could not withstand the devastating physical trauma that followed. To understand the magnitude of what happened, it's crucial to understand the basic anatomy of an 8-year-old girl compared to that of an adult woman. Rawan's reproductive system was in its earliest stages of development. Her uterus was approximately the size of a small walnut. Her ovaries were tiny and inactive. Her vagina was as narrow as a pencil. Her entire reproductive apparatus was years away from the maturity necessary for any type of sexual activity. The uterine rupture that Rawan suffered is a catastrophic medical injury, even for adult women with fully developed reproductive systems. In modern hospitals, with specialized surgical teams and intensive care available, uterine rupture still represents a medical emergency with significant risk of death. For an 8-year-old child in a rural area without adequate medical resources, it was essentially a death sentence. When uterine tissue ruptures, the result is massive and uncontrollable internal hemorrhaging. Blood spreads throughout the abdominal cavity. Blood pressure plummets rapidly, and without immediate surgical intervention, death from hemorrhagic shock is inevitable. Rawan's small body, with a total blood volume much smaller than an adult's, couldn't afford to lose any significant amount of blood. The pain Rawan experienced during and after the rupture is literally indescribable. Children of this age don't possess emotional or physical vocabulary to articulate what's happening to their bodies when facing such extreme trauma. She probably felt absolute terror, complete confusion about why she was feeling so much pain, and a growing sense that something was terribly wrong, but without the ability to effectively communicate what was happening. Beyond the primary uterine rupture, Rawan probably suffered multiple other internal injuries. Her small and delicate pelvic organs, bladder, intestines, blood vessels, may have been damaged by the trauma. The physical shock of her infantile nervous system trying to process adult magnitude pain may have caused additional neurological effects. As the internal hemorrhaging progressed, Rawan would have experienced growing symptoms of hemorrhagic shock, cold and moist skin, rapid and shallow breathing, accelerated but weak pulse, increasing mental confusion, and eventually loss of consciousness. These signs, easily recognizable by trained medical professionals, were probably complete mysteries to her family and community. When it became undeniably clear that something was catastrophically wrong with Rawan, a desperate race began against a clock that was almost exhausted. In remote rural communities like Hajar province, where Rawan lived and died, the concept of emergency medical care is practically abstract. There are no ambulances waiting at strategic posts, no trained paramedic teams, no medical rescue helicopters. The nearest hospital capable of dealing with a medical emergency of the magnitude Rawan faced was probably many hours away on precarious, mountainous, and often impassable roads. During the rainy season, these roads can become completely impassable, isolating entire communities for days or weeks. Even under ideal conditions, the time needed to transport Rawan to adequate medical care was probably longer than the time she had to survive. The lack of modern communication in the region created another almost insurmountable obstacle. Without reliable cell phones, internet, or even terrestrial telephone lines, there was no way to quickly communicate with distant hospitals, request ambulances, or even ask for basic medical advice from qualified professionals. Rawan's family was essentially isolated with a medical emergency that completely exceeded their response capacity. While Rawan fought for her life, losing precious blood with each passing minute, her family probably faced impossible decisions. Trying to transport her immediately in an improvised vehicle over bad roads could accelerate her death due to movement trauma. But remaining in the community waiting for help that might never come practically guaranteed her death from hemorrhaging. Generalized medical ignorance in the community meant that even the most basic first aid efforts were probably inadequate or potentially harmful. Without understanding internal hemorrhaging, hemorrhagic shock, or trauma stabilization, well-intentioned attempts to help may have inadvertently accelerated Rawan's deterioration. Emergency transport improvised in rural areas of Yemen is often carried out in vehicles totally inadequate for critical patients. Trucks, private cars in poor condition, or even pack animals may be the only available options. For Rawan, already in critical hemorrhagic shock, the additional trauma of transport in inadequate conditions may have been the determining factor between life and death. During the desperate journey to the hospital, Rawan probably lost consciousness multiple times, her breathing became more labored, and her vital signs continued deteriorating. Her family, helplessly watching as an 8-year-old child slowly died in their arms, faced the kind of horror no parent should ever experience, and all because of a decision they thought would protect her. When they finally reached the hospital, if they made it in time, the available medical resources were probably inadequate for the type of emergency surgery Rawan needed. Rural hospitals in Yemen often lack basic equipment like blood banks, adequately equipped operating rooms, or surgeons specialized in pediatric gynecological trauma. But why, in the 21st century, do tragedies like this still happen when we have medical knowledge and technology to prevent them completely? Rawan's death could have remained a local tragedy, another name in statistics that rarely reach international headlines. But a combination of factors transformed her story into a global catalyst for change. The courage of local activists to speak out, the responsibility of journalists to investigate, and the power of social media to amplify voices that needed to be heard. When news of Rawan's death reached the offices of reputable international media outlets, it caused a chain reaction that reverberated around the world. The Guardian, one of the most respected publications globally, dedicated extensive coverage to the case, treating it not as sensationalism, but as a serious human rights issue that demanded serious international attention. Reuters, the international news agency, distributed the story to hundreds of outlets around the world, ensuring that Rawan's tragedy didn't remain confined to the pages of Middle East specialized newspapers. Suddenly, people on all continents were reading about an 8-year-old Yemeni girl who died because of a tradition that many assumed had been abandoned decades ago. Arwa Othman, a courageous activist and then head of Yemen's House of Folklore, played a crucial role in ensuring Rawan's story wasn't suppressed or distorted. In a society where questioning traditions can result in social ostracism or even physical danger, her willingness to speak publicly about the case details demonstrated extraordinary courage and genuine commitment to protecting other children. International coverage created unprecedented political pressure on Yemeni authorities. A government already facing multiple internal crises suddenly found itself at the center of intense global scrutiny about its marriage laws and child protection. Diplomats from donor countries, international human rights organizations, and global activists began asking difficult questions about why such tragedies were allowed. Although local leaders in Hajj province initially tried to deny the facts or minimize the case's severity, international attention made it impossible to simply ignore or suppress the incident. Global pressure forced an official investigation, even if reluctant. demonstrating how international awareness can create accountability in situations where local systems fail. Rawan's case quickly became one of the most cited examples in international organizations' reports on child marriage. UNICEF, Human Rights Watch, Save the Children, and dozens of other NGOs incorporated her story into educational campaigns, annual reports, and advocacy materials, transforming an individual tragedy into a powerful symbol of a global cause. Social media exponentially amplified the reach of Rawan's story. Hashtags related to her case began trending on platforms around the world, with millions of people sharing her story, expressing outrage, and demanding action. This digital mobilization demonstrated how local tragedies can instantly become global causes in the digital communication era. Rawan's death exposed a disturbing global reality that extends far beyond Yemen's remote mountains. Child marriage remains a widespread practice, affecting millions of girls on all continents. According to UNICEF's latest data, approximately 12 million girls are forced into marriage before age 18 annually. This means every 3 seconds, somewhere in the world, a girl has her childhood brutally interrupted. But these cold statistics don't capture the geographical, cultural, and economic complexity of the problem. Child marriage is not exclusive to developing countries, certain religions, or specific cultures. It persists in all regions of the world, manifesting in different but equally harmful ways. In the United States, for example, between 2000 and 2018, approximately 300,000 children married legally, mostly girls married to adult men. Poverty consistently emerges as the most significant risk factor. Families facing extreme economic insecurity often see marriage of minor daughters as a survival strategy. It reduces household expenses, can generate income through dowries, and transfers financial responsibility to other families. This brutal economic reality transforms children into commodities in informal matrimonial markets. Limited education, especially for girls, perpetuates cycles of child marriage through generations. When girls don't have access to formal education, their future economic options are drastically limited, making marriage the only perceived form of security. Simultaneously, uneducated parents often lack knowledge about child development, medical risks associated with early pregnancy, and children's legal rights. Armed conflicts and political instability dramatically exacerbate child marriage risks. During wars, forced displacements, and collapses of social protection systems, desperate families often resort to marriage as a perceived protection strategy for girls. Paradoxically, this attempt at protection often exposes girls to even greater risks. Child marriage consequences create intergenerational cycles of vulnerability. Girls married early often abandon formal education, severely limiting their future economic opportunities. They face dramatically higher rates of domestic violence, with studies indicating that women married in childhood are 3 times more likely to experience conjugal violence. Early pregnancy, an almost inevitable consequence of child marriage, brings devastating medical risks. Girls between 10 and 14 years old are 5 times more likely to die during childbirth compared to women between 20 and 24 years old. Their babies face dramatically elevated risks of infant mortality, low birth weight, and long-term developmental problems. Psychological impacts of child marriage are profound and lasting. Girls forced into marriage often develop depression, anxiety, and post-traumatic stress disorder. Social isolation resulting from early marriage can cause psychological damage that persists for decades, affecting their ability to form healthy relationships and make autonomous decisions. Organizations like Girls Not Brides, a global partnership encompassing more than 1,400 civil society organizations, work tirelessly to eradicate child marriage through multifaceted approaches. Their programs include community awareness campaigns, advocacy for legal reforms, educational programs for at-risk girls, and economic initiatives for vulnerable families. Although Rawan's story is deeply tragic and represents one of the most devastating examples of child marriage consequences, her death was not in vain. The global impact of her case catalyzed significant changes that literally saved thousands of lives of other girls around the world, transforming an individual tragedy into a global child protection movement. In Yemen itself, despite ongoing conflicts devastating the country, the international commotion caused by Rawan's death contributed to serious discussions about matrimonial law reform. Local activists, inspired by the global attention her case received, intensified campaigns to establish and enforce minimum legal age for marriage, using her story as a powerful example of the dangers of ignoring child protections. International human rights organizations systematically incorporated Rawan's story into their educational materials and advocacy campaigns. Her case is frequently cited in annual reports, presentations to legislators, and training programs for professionals working with child protection, keeping alive the memory of a girl who became a symbol of a cause much larger than her own tragedy. Educational programs in vulnerable communities around the world now use stories like Rawan's to raise awareness among parents and community leaders about concrete medical risks of child marriage. When families understand that marrying their small daughters can literally kill them, many fundamentally reconsider these traditional decisions, demonstrating how evidence-based education can overcome harmful traditions. Economic initiatives also emerged directly inspired by cases like Rawan's. Conditional cash transfer programs, which provide regular financial support to families that keep their daughters in school until appropriate ages, help address the economic pressures that often lead to child marriage. These programs, implemented in dozens of countries, have already protected millions of girls. Legislative changes were also catalyzed by her story. Multiple countries strengthened their laws on minimum marriage age, closed legal loopholes that previously allowed dangerous exceptions, and implemented more severe penalties for those who facilitate child marriages. Although there's still much legislative work to be done, each strengthened law potentially represents thousands of girls protected from fates similar to Rawan's. Technological advances also played a transformative role. Mobile applications and digital platforms now allow girls at risk to connect directly with aid organizations, report threats of forced marriage through secure channels, and access educational resources about their fundamental rights. These systems, unthinkable at the time of Rawan's death, have already saved countless lives. Global awareness campaigns gained extraordinary momentum after her case. International Days to Combat Child Marriage now mobilize millions of people annually. Celebrities use their platforms to educate about the issue, and multinational corporations invest significant resources in prevention programs, creating a global movement that transcends cultural and political boundaries. Monitoring and rapid response systems were developed specifically to prevent tragedies like Rawan's. International organizations now maintain global databases on child marriages, early warning systems to identify at-risk communities, and rapid response networks that can intervene when girls are in imminent danger. Specialized medical programs also emerged in direct response to cases like hers. Training for healthcare professionals on how to identify and respond to evidence of child marriage, development of medical protocols to treat survivors, and creation of specialized care centers for girls who escaped forced marriages represent direct advances inspired by her tragedy. Perhaps most importantly, Rawan's story helped fundamentally change global conversations about child marriage. What was previously often dismissed as a cultural issue that outsiders shouldn't judge is now universally recognized as a serious human rights violation requiring urgent international intervention. Rawan's story confronts us with a simultaneously painful and powerful truth. In the 21st century, we still live in a world where children are treated as property, where traditions can be more valued than precious human lives, and where child vulnerability continues to be exploited in the name of family economic needs or obsolete cultural norms. But her story also demonstrates the absolutely transformative power of mobilized collective consciousness. When the world genuinely becomes outraged, when diverse voices unite in coordinated protest, when individual stories touch global hearts and inspire concrete action, real and measurable changes can happen quickly. Every time we share Rawan's story with our network of contacts, we honor her memory in a tangible way and potentially save another girl from a similar fate. Every uncomfortable but necessary conversation about child marriage we initiate in our social circles, every educational post we share on our social networks, every donation we make to specialized organizations working directly with this cause, all of this cumulatively contributes to a world where no 8-year-old girl needs to die on a wedding night. Rawan couldn't be saved by the systems that existed in 2013, but her story continues to save other girls daily. She became an incredibly powerful posthumous voice for fundamental children's rights, a permanent and urgent reminder that every girl deserves to live her childhood fully, dream freely about her future, grow up in absolute safety and unquestionable dignity. Rawan's lasting legacy represents a direct call to action for each of us. We cannot allow her death to be forgotten in statistics or for other girls to face similar fates due to our collective inaction. Each of us possesses real power to make a measurable difference, whether through active awareness, political advocacy, financial support to relevant organizations, or simply refusing to accept that tradition can justify child suffering. Her story teaches us that global changes often begin with individual actions. When one person shares, another becomes aware. When someone becomes aware, they can educate others. When communities educate themselves, they can pressure for legislative changes. When laws change, lives are saved. This is the multiplying power of individual action transformed into collective movement. At this moment, while you process this devastating but important story, millions of girls around the world are in vulnerable situations similar to what Rawan faced. Some may be being prepared for forced marriages this week. Others may be being negotiated by their families at this exact moment. The time to act is not tomorrow or next week. It's now. If this story touched your heart, as it deeply touched mine, I earnestly ask that you become an active part of the solution. Share this content in your WhatsApp groups. Post on all your social networks. Initiate difficult but necessary conversations with friends and family about this global reality. Your share can literally be the difference between a child living her childhood fully or having it brutally and unnecessarily interrupted. Let's ensure that Rawan's memory continues to be a transformative force for good in the world. Let's collectively guarantee that her short but significant life has lasting and measurable impact. Let's work together, in a coordinated and persistent way, for a world where no girl needs to die from being forced to grow up too fast.